Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to The Caring Economy with me, your host, Toby Usnik. We're now in our 19th season, and I'm really pleased today to have as our guest Walt Dabney. Walt is a legendary figure in America's park management and the conservation community. His distinguished career began in 1969 as a ranger slash naturalist at Yellowstone's Old Faithful District, and it spanned more than 4 decades across some of the nation's most iconic landscapes, from Yosemite and the Grand Tetons to the Everglades and Alaska's vast national parks and monuments. Rising through the ranks of the National Park Service, Walt ultimately served as Chief Ranger, overseeing official programs in law enforcement, emergency response, and resource protection for thousands of rangers nationwide. Later, he led the Texas Parks and Wildlife as Director of State Parks. There, he was driving organizational transformation and stewardship. And even after retirement, Walt remains a passionate educator, advocate, and speaker, sharing the rich history and urgent challenges facing America's public lands, such incredible natural resources and economic resources for the U.S. It's all the more poignant as dozens of other countries around the world are following the U.S.'s lead in parks maintenance and building and expanding, while we seem to be dismantling ours. Today, we'll explore his journey, his insights on conservation, and his ongoing work, thank God, to protect the lands that belong to all of us, including his amazing organization, America's Public Lands. So with no further ado, Walt Dabney, welcome to The Caring Economy.
Toby, it's good to be with you.
For our listener audience, I should let them know that I only approached you last week. I heard an interview on a fantastic KOTO radio and Telluride where I'd spent some time, and I love that station. And you were doing an interview, I think it was on an NPR program, and I just was mesmerized by you, your voice, the stories you were telling, and the work that you've done. So I reached out to you and you responded, which I think is a nice message for people. Pick up the phone, respond to people, even if it's just to say, no, I can't help you. So I want to thank you for that. And then I want to just launch right into it and ask you to please, Walt, give us a sort of 3 to 5 minute digest of your life. How did you find your passion, your way, and maybe pivots or mentors along the way?
Well, you covered a lot of my career, so I won't go back all through that. I mean, I was at Texas A&M University, got a degree in park administration, and that was because the department head there took a chance on me because I was clearly not going to make it in engineering. I was not intended to be an engineer, Toby, and he took a chance on me. I was, I think, the first undergraduate student in the Department of Recreation and Parks at Texas A&M in about 1966.
Wow.
And anyway, you mentioned I got selected as a student trainee and got sent to Yellowstone. I didn't know anything about it. I'd never been that far west, and I'd certainly not been to Yellowstone, and I didn't really know exactly what a park naturalist did. Thought, hell, might as well go see what that does. And by the end of that summer, I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It was amazing adventure. And so then I spent the next 30 years in the national parks. And as we talked about a little before, I would love to do it again. I absolutely loved being a national park ranger and interacting with park visitors. And we had a lot of serious challenges. I was in rescue and law enforcement and firefighting and all that kind of thing. And your job is to help the visitor have a safe and enjoyable experience in their national parks. And I think I looked at it almost as a calling. You certainly aren't hugely paid, but I wouldn't have traded it. I mean, that's just a fact. So I then, after 30 years with NPS, I got asked if I would be willing to come back to Texas and run the state park system. Maybe because I spoke fluent Texan, I don't know. And anyway, I went home, and it was in really rough shape, and the legislature was not very supportive of it. In fact, they weren't at all. We almost looked like a third world operation. And so for the next 11 and a half years, we really started working on stuff and getting the public involved in their parks. Which is why I'm doing this whole deal that I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Is we are so lucky in this country to have what we have in parks and in public lands. And that website, America's Public Land, that you're talking about, which is not a business enterprise for me. I don't make anything out of this. It actually, I'm kind of a itinerant traveling preacher. I this call, but but it's worth it. Anyway, these are ours.
Yes,
And the rest of the world mostly doesn't have anything like this.
I hear
We
you.
are so completely lucky. And, we can talk a bunch about the specifics of that. But, I'll just say real quickly about parks. It's an American idea. I mean,
Yes.
really starting with, I say, Yellowstone in 1872 when President Grant signed the Yellowstone Act, which set aside Yellowstone as a landscape size place, 2 million acres of land. And it was territorial land at that time belonging to the United States. And while there was opposition saying, man, if you do this, the town of Bozeman will be abandoned. Well, try to find a parking place in Bozeman now. I mean, it's just ripping. But it was the first place in the world, big, that was set aside not for royalty or wealthy people, but the sign over the north entrance in Yellowstone says for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. That's all of us.
Mhm.
And we own it. And all the lands that are public lands administered by the BLM and the Forest Service and national parks and fish and wildlife, while people say they're federal lands, that means you and I
You
own
own
them.
them.
We are public landowners.
Yep.
And so I put this program together to tell the story of how we got them and how different decisions were made, how states were carved out of this public domain, how some of it, a lot of it became private,
Hmm.
what we have left and why that is, and how parks and forests and so forth were established. And unfortunately, the efforts that are out there today to get them out of our public hands.
Right.
There's serious efforts that have, in some cases, been long going
Yep.
to move the lands out of our common ownership and transfer them to, for
Yep.
example, to states. And they would be gone then because the states couldn't pay to operate them.
Yep.
And that's a long story, too.
No, but I appreciate it. And it's a well-funded movement. We're going to come back to this, but I want to go back to the very beginning, just say that while I'm not from Texas, I love Texans. My husband's from San Antonio. My two of my four brothers graduated A&M, so go Aggies. Uh,
Oh,
Shout out to Todd and Tracy. And well, one of the things I love about Texans, I've always said, big hair, big hearts, big personalities. You just can't go wrong with a Texan. And you're proving it yet again. That said, I wonder if you could tell, like, you're a young boy, there you are in Texas. Did you hunt? Were you drawn to nature? There must have been something that clicked that said, I want to have a career. I want to be outdoors. I don't want to be working behind a desk or something. Can you give us a little bit of reflection on that?
I absolutely can. When I was growing up in Texas, of course, I wasn't paying attention to land status in Texas. My granddad had a ranch, and it was part of a bigger ranch. His brothers and sisters sold their piece of it. His dad, who was a Confederate soldier,
Wow.
went out there after the war and bought this in 1883. And when he died, the five kids got it, and my granddad's the only one that kept his. It right at 1,000 acres, which in Texas is not huge, but in a lot of places, pretty big place. And that's where I grew up with this granddad who knew the land. He was so into it and had been brought up with it. His dad was apparently a real character, a wounded Confederate soldier and a tough old guy. And anyway, my granddad, for my brother and cousin and I, the three closest ones, was our best buddy. And he taught us everything from how to chase goats to shoot deer and process them and
Hmm.
how to go fishing and all that kind of thing. So I was an outdoor guy.
There you
Didn't know that much about national parks and so forth because we always had the ranch.
go. Hmm.
And then in about 1983, 100 years after we got it, it was sold. And so that wasn't, by the time I went back as director, that was gone. In Texas, 96% privately owned land.
Yes.
I then, after I retired from the Park Service, wanted to come back west. The real adventure to me, and I mentioned it right at the beginning, was when I was in recreation and parks, got selected as a student trainee right at the end of with one semester left, and went to Yellowstone.
Mhm.
Then I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't spend a lot of time in parks before that because I went to the ranch and did that kind of thing and had friends that had places to go. But once I saw Yellowstone and places around Yellowstone and experienced the stuff we could do out there, I just thought it was
That's great.
magical.
Let me ask you a question, turn sort of the question around to you. Your passion is real. You've been, I would argue, purpose driven from the start. You found your way eventually to your career. You have managed thousands and thousands of people, young and old. I am sure that there are those who've come to you through the years that are eager to be in the forestry service, in, serving the parks, but a lot of them maybe are not really cut out for it. And I wonder if that's a fair statement, or is it a calling for everybody, as you very aptly described it? And how do you manage people's expectations around a career in that kind of space?
Some people aren't cut out for it. I lived in pretty isolated locations for a long time.
Mm,
You need to want to be physically fit because visitors and your partners count on you being able to pull your load, whatever it is, on a fire,
mm,
on a bad law enforcement situation, on a rescue. And so that's not for everybody. We saw some horrific, tragedies and that kind of thing of people that were hurt and killed and all that. So you got to be willing to deal with all that. You got to like people
mm.
because that's what it's all about. You're not in some isolated cabin somewhere with nobody around. I worked in Yellowstone, Yosemite, Mount Rainier, the Tetons. They're almost an anthill. It's just crawling with people.
Yeah,
And so you're dealing with that. Can you get away from it? Certainly you can. And that's what the resource is about. But most of my days as a field ranger, I was dealing with people, answering their questions, helping them, patching them up if they were hurt,
yeah,
looking for their kids if they were lost, giving directions, all those kind of things. So you got to really enjoy people, and not everybody likes that.
yeah.
And not everybody can answer the same question over and over and over without getting
Mm,
tired of it. And so, but I really did like that. It is a grand life. And I tell you, when all this mess that's happening now hopefully is behind us, we're going to have to rebuild the Park Service and the BLM and the Forest Service.
mhm.
What's happening now is not what you asked me, but it's just a
No, please
tragedy.
go right there. I'm with you.
It is just an absolute tragedy. If you're going to downsize an operation, and to me, downsizing the Park Service, a couple of things. One, it's one of the most popular agencies in the federal government. Routinely, the employees, rangers, and so forth are at the top of federal employees as far as the public's
Esteem for
perception.
them. Yeah.
And we were already understaffed, barely holding our own to be able to do everything from run an entrance station to help people with their questions, to run the visitor center operation, to clean bathrooms, to do all those kind of things. And last year, the National Park System, for example, set a record of 339 million visits to the system.
Mm,
That's just incredible. And
yeah.
it's also worth huge amounts of money to America, to the states where these parks exist, and very much so to rural economies where these parks exist and where they're bringing people from all over the world because they exist there that would not be coming to that location otherwise.
Yeah.
And, and they're the primary focus of many of those economies.
To that point in your advocacy, I think, I mean, let's stick with this topic. I think that we all have to do our part to step up. So just your raising awareness and reminding people that these are our assets, not a company's or a state's, is helpful. You're presumably lobbying in certain ways. I know several people in the Forestry Service or volunteers up in Acadia, my friend Lily Pugh, our friend Carl Deals, our trustee down at Big Bend National Park. Sue and David Rockefeller friends, Doug before he died, and Chris Tompkins, I know fairly well, who built the whole, helps to start the Chilean system of national parks there. the passion's there, but you need to have the tactics. So, can you talk a little bit about how people can take action?
Before I do that, let me answer that piece of your question. When this nightmare gets by us that's happening right now, we're going to need to rebuild the park system
Mhm.
staff, and we need to do that deliberately and replace positions that are truly necessary. But having run parks, you don't have the luxury of having superfluous positions. You got to have people that are fully engaged in doing what they're responsible to do. What is terrible right now is when you go in there, you have no clue what you're doing. You may not have even ever been to a national park, and you're just looking at an employee roster and you're seeing a person's name and position and a dollar sign, and you're just whacking them off. You have no idea what that person does for that park, how that job interacts or is critical to someone else being able to do their job. And so you couldn't be more deliberate in an effort to destroy an organization than by approaching it that way. And that's what's happening. And when this is over with, assuming the American public does not want their park system to go away, we're going to have to rebuild it deliberately.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you already, to your question about young people, unless you just have no interest in it, it's an incredible life. I mean, if you want to learn to be outdoors, you want to learn to deal with people, you want to learn skills, climbing, skiing, hiking, camping, all those kind of things, rescue. It's it's exciting. I like adrenaline. I mean, even as a 79-year-old guy, I still am a pretty serious mountain biker and so
Pretty
forth. It just gets in your blood and you want to keep doing it. But there are some serious opportunities for young people today. I don't think it's true that all young people just want to go make a lot of money. I think a lot of them want to do something that's meaningful and
Mhm.
actually makes a difference in the world. And working in public lands and parks is absolutely that. And so there's going to be some opportunities, assuming we get back to reality and move forward, because we've got a gold mine here with these parks,
Mhm.
figuratively speaking, if we don't screw them up. And they will keep generating huge economies for a long time. Let me do one more little
Sure.
aside.
Yeah, yeah.
Take Moab, Utah. It's in Grand County, Utah. Total population of Grand County is about 8,000 people. You know how many people come to see the parks and public lands yearly in
I would
Grand
guess
County?
500,000 at least.
3 million.
Yeah.
And they're not all coming to see Aunt Mildred. They're coming there to see Arches and Canyonlands, the forest and BLM, and they absolutely love it. And I tell you, as bad as COVID was, following COVID, people wanted out of the cities. They wanted to get away where they could go do something. Many of them had no experience, no equipment or anything. They got out there and they decided, hell, this is fun. What
Yeah.
are we going to do it all this time? So now these public lands are absolutely swamped with people
Yep.
that want to be there and they're enjoying them. It's doing nothing but going up.
Yeah.
So, young people, if you have any interest, look at that. Try to go work seasonally or something for these agencies, and it will sort out, Toby, in your personality. It'll
Mhm.
sort out whether, man, I like this. I like this physically. I like this mentally. I like the interaction. I like living and working with people. In many places in the parks, you live around the same people you work with all day. So that's a little different than commuting to work and seeing those people and then going home to your own different world.
Yeah.
So it's a different experience and a different lifestyle, but it is superb. So your next question, you'll have to remind me.
I will, but first, quick interstitial. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm really honored to have as our guest Walt Dabney. He's a legendary leader in America's parks management system and conservation. Walt, before we came on, you and I were bantering back and forth about how happy you've been at 79 years with your career. And I coach a lot of young people as well as dismayed older people. And I think we need to encourage people to seek joy, as romantic as that might sound, but in a pragmatic way. So you know what where your joy comes from. find careers or ancillary careers that can get you there. For example, you said the Moab example. Well, if you can't work for the national parks right now, maybe you can work in the food and beverage industry or hospitality in that area and assimilate a bit. So you can close the gap between what joy is for an employee or a colleague or a kid, family member, and the realities of workday and making a living. So could you just reflect a little bit about on joy? Because you found it, and you and I both noted how you can count on one finger the number of people who have told you of late how much they love their job. And that is a crisis, I think, as well as what's happening to our parks and every other aspect of our nation.
Well, that's a big one, Toby. Again, I loved mine. When I started talking to you, I think I mentioned that I've been doing a program on leadership and supervision since about 1980. One of the things I talk about when I first started doing this, I saw a Roper poll that said 75% or so of people in America hate what they do for a living.
Mm.
And I still tell people, I said, I never in my whole career told people, and when they said, how long you been working? I'd say, so I never said, and I only have 3 years, 19 days to go till I can retire. Hell,
Countdown. Yeah.
no way. If your focus is on getting through it and retiring, you need to find something you want to really do
Mm.
because life is long. And if you're miserable most of the time you're at work, try to find something else. So I found it. I also moved around, as you pointed out. I was a little bit, that's what national park folks did in my career, and I like that. And I am a firm believer that you can be happy or miserable wherever you are, and it's your choice.
Yes.
Uh, when I transferred from the Tetons after working in Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Mount Rainier, and then the Tetons, I went to Everglades.
Mm.
And I said I'd never go east of the Mississippi River, and I went to the Everglades. And I'd been up on the up on the Grand Teton a number of times and climbed a number of those peaks. And I didn't go to Florida looking for 14,000 foot mountain or 13,000 foot mountain. Rock Reef Pass on the way to Flamingo was elevation 4 feet. And you were in sawgrass and miles of water. And so I could really use my NPS diving certification and got into diving and a lot of prescribed burning. Yellow or Everglades had the oldest prescribed fire program in the nation,
Huh.
and starting in 1947. And you learn new things. And I was happy as a clam there. And then I did something I said I'd never do. I'd go to Washington, D.C., and I spent 5.5 years as the NPS chief ranger. And I put everybody in DC in my ranger activities office back in uniform out of a damn coat and tie.
Mm.
Said,
The part. Yeah.
if you're going to represent rangers, you need to look like one. And I ended up on Capitol Hill probably 6 or 8 times during the Yellowstone fires. And I tell you, it was different walking into a hearing room in my uniform and setting my flat hat on the testifying desk. You weren't just a suit.
Hmm.
and, that was very helpful in the whole thing. But if young people are interested, I'd encourage you to go try it. You mentioned working in a concession or something. You can do that. You can a lot of times go out and learn to be an apprentice guide, river guide, mountain bike guide, whatever, working around national park areas or public lands. Uh, all those are way to get in, and they're voluntary organizations. They just hammered AmeriCorps, which is absolutely a horrible thing. That was one of the best programs for young people to get them out of something other than being on their damn phone all day or being in the city and getting out and learning something about what I think is the real world.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll come back, even though you say, we should start to think about the rebuilding. We also need to brace ourselves for the collateral damage that's happening right now because it's full on, to say the least. I wonder if there are corporations that you're familiar with that you would give a shout out to because of their advocacy. I believe Salesforce has been a supporter of the national parks historically, or maybe some of the, I don't know, the automobile or truck manufacturers who provide transportation vehicles or something. Are there brands that are associated well with the parks that come to mind?
Toby, I've been out of the Park Service for a long time now. Yeah, I've been out of the Park Service, so I don't know. I don't know who they're working with right now.
Okay,
There are organizations that absolutely support the national parks, and there's corporations that run the concessions in national parks.
there you go.
Uh,
And
but
then there are also, I think there are ski resorts within national parks and different kinds of ways to put yourself in that environment. I wonder,
most of the ski areas are actually in national forest lands,
I
and
wonder
not.
when you talk about, sorry to interrupt, your leadership program. If anyone listening wanted to hire you to either come speak to their employees or even offer a leadership seminar, not necessarily related to park service or conservation, have you done that? Would you do that if someone wanted to have you come in and rally the troops?
There's plenty of people that do this professionally. Again, I don't. I'm heading to Oklahoma for Southwest Park and Recreation Training Institute, and I'm going to do 3 sessions for them, but I don't charge for that. And I'm on the road so much with this, doing presentations on America's public land, and none of it's a business for me. I don't want to start a business. I'm already having trouble getting on the river or going fishing and mountain biking and stuff and trying not to act old.
Well,
That I don't want to expand that,
yeah.
but um,
Let me ask you a different way. What if, for example, your organization, America's Public Land, if a listener wants to just volunteer for free and help out there, are you open to the idea of having volunteers?
I don't have an organization that's out doing things in park. Mine, the whole thing for me and why I started this about going on 9 years ago now, 8 years ago, is because of all the misinformation about public lands. And I started thinking, man, that doesn't sound right. I've
Hmm.
been doing this a long time. I don't think that's accurate. So I started researching it and ended up putting the program together that has evolved through the years. And it's evolved in large measure because I'd go talk to a group, and invariably people came up, and oftentimes in many cases, they were folks that had worked in agencies and said, hell, I've worked in this forever. I didn't know that. And so, if that's the case,
Yeah,
and you have these people that are advocating getting these lands out of our public hands and transferring them to a state or something, and they have no affinity for the truth, they'll say anything, and much of it, if you don't know what's true, it may sound reasonable or logical, and it may be complete BS. And if you don't know what's true, you're at a serious disadvantage.
yeah,
And so the only way to stop losing these lands that we all own together is to make sure that Congress knows you do not want to see them go away.
yeah,
And so my focus is on you knowing what's true. And secondly, when they ask, what can we do about it? The thing you can do about it, the only way you can get rid of the public lands, I hope, but the only way you can get rid of public lands legally is for Congress to say, we're going to get rid of them all. We're going to get rid of this piece. We're going to deauthorize this national park, whatever it is. And I think most Americans do not want to see that happen. So you're going to have to be ready to call your congressional delegation, not just in the Western states, your congressional delegation in states that have very little public land. Because if you're in New York or New Jersey or Massachusetts, you own the public lands in Wyoming just as much as I do, or in Colorado where I live now, just as much as I do. They're yours.
hmm.
And whether you
They're
go
worth fighting for.
whether you go see them or not, or whether you go regularly. You look at Colorado and Idaho and Wyoming and Montana and all those, you look how many people from Texas and places are coming out there to go hunting, to go fishing, to use their four-wheel drive vehicles, to bring their horses all the way from these states where there's no place to go unless you're going to ride around in a circle in a corral. And they can come out here and go on a week-long horseback trip or multi-day four-wheel drive adventure on backcountry roads and camp along the way or go in hunting and fishing or go in mushroom hunting or whatever you like to do. And and so they come out here and those lands are theirs. They're able to use them. And so they need to be very vocal
Yeah.
because
And also, that usage is a way to educate, right? Once you go to the Grand Canyon, you will forever be an advocate for the Grand Canyon, just as predecessors were for us. And there's so many other elements of this too, the indigenous people, the sustainability, the environmental stuff. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize how much we benefit vis-a-vis the climate and the environment because of the parklands, right? The carbon sinks, the things they absorb, diversity of species. That's also in peril, right?
that's absolutely true. And these places are extremely important in climate change. They're also important, I think, especially something like the parks, but even the forests and public lands. You know, growing up, think of your life. Every place you go back to is so totally changed from when you were growing up. You can go to Yellowstone when you're a kid, and you can go back to Yellowstone when you're a dad or a granddad or whatever, and it's pretty much the same. And the mission of the National Park Service is to provide for the enjoyment today, but to pass them on unimpaired
Mhm.
for future generations. We're not building a bunch of new things in national parks. We're not putting in a bunch of new roads. You've got a road system and a reasonable number of campgrounds and that kind of thing. And it's more important that you provide the rest of those support facilities outside around the park so that locals can benefit and make money from that.
Mhm.
And they provide the support guides and outfitter functions, the tours, the restaurants and gift shops and tire stores and camp gear and all that that people need to enjoy their visit. And it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship. But the main park thing, Canyonlands, people kept telling me the whole time I was superintendent, you know, it would be perfect right there at Grandview Point to put a big El Tovar hotel right there on the rim. And I said, the hell it would. I said, first of all,
It's not for sale.
we, El Tovar is there. If it were today, you wouldn't be putting the El Tovar on the rim of the Grand Canyon. As wonderful an experience as it is, that you would put those support facilities outside and you would leave that rim of the Grand Canyon on the south rim pretty uncluttered. That's not the case there, but Canyonlands doesn't have that. And so people at Chamber of Commerce, I remember, asked me one time, and I said, think about this. Not we, but the Park Service agreed, yep, let's go out for a bid contract on a huge hotel on the rim of Canyonlands. I guarantee you, that facility will be full before you are, and it will not be owned by you. It'll be owned by a big corporation who outbid you as a small operator, and they'll be making the money and you want. And so I personally, as a superintendent, would rather you provide that service out there. We don't clutter up Canyonlands and we leave it to be the incredible natural scene that has changed very little ever, and let them come back after a hard day out there or after 4 days in the back country to come in and eat at your restaurant and stay in your hotel and that kind of thing. That's a whole lot. Oh, okay.
Get
I
it.
can buy that. And so,
I think that's a really great point. Thanks to stewardship and advocacy, like we've been discussing, we can hope and work toward leaving these great assets to the next generation. And if we don't step up, then that may not happen. So it's a very clear message. Well, I'm mindful of the time. We've gone a little bit over here, but I wanted to ask you if you have in your career a sort of what I call pearls of wisdom or any lessons learned or things you might even repeat mantra like to people about leading a purpose-driven life or a purpose-driven career. Any words or advice you give pretty regularly to people who want to have the same kind of joyful career you've had?
you know, I would take it from several different things, and I'm just talking off the top of my
Sure.
head, Toby. I think you can be happy or sad, whatever you end up doing or wherever you are, and that's your choice, and you need to do it. I think this notion that it's hard to be successful in jobs today and to move up the chain is complete crap. If you're good at what you do, even if you're not very good at it when you get there, but your reputation is you're going to do everything you possibly can to learn everything you can about what you're doing.
Mm.
If you have the attitude that you're going to treat everybody you work with and work for with respect, regardless of their job, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what color they are, everything like that. If you do your job, even if you hate it, in an outstanding way, and everybody knows that, you can write your own ticket in this world. If you think the world owes you some damn thing, you're going to get nowhere.
Right.
Nowhere.
Take a
I'm,
number.
I'm still out on the trails on my mountain bike. I climbed Mount Princeton 8 months ago with my youngest daughter, and I ran into two folks below the summit, and they said, "What are you doing up here?" I said, "Heading up there." And we talked for a while. They were in their 20s working in restaurants here in Buena Vista. And they said, "Wow, have a good trip." And they turned and started walking away. And the guy turned to me and he said, "Sir, could I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure. How old are you?" And I said, I'm 78. And he said, I won't use the word he said, but he said, "There's no way." And I said, "The other is," he said, "How do you do that?" And I said, "You know what the answer to that is? Number one, you got to want to. And number two, you got to never quit doing it." And most of my peers, Toby, couldn't possibly do it. They don't understand why in the hell I'd want to. And they're missing a huge thing out of life, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So be fun to be around. Humor's a good thing. Be willing to help anybody else do their job. Be somebody people want to be around and want to work with.
Yeah.
And regardless of whatever you do, if you keep that in mind, you'll have a successful life.
Great advice. And I would just chime in there at the end. Well, if you are nice and try to have fun with people you work with, then not only will you have that great career, but you will have had fun along the way, right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy to some degree.
It absolutely is. And the last thing I tell them is you want to be taking care of yourself throughout that whole time,
Yeah.
both physically and fiscally. And, park rangers, and I've told people, and a lot of them have come to me after the fact and said, "Damn, I'm glad you told me that." Because they'll say, "We don't make enough to really save any money. You can't afford not to save some money." In a lot of my career, I lived in a government house because I was required to. I was on call. I'd get called out at any time of night for no telling what. And you paid low rent, but if you weren't doing something different on the side and you retired 30 years after doing this kind of thing and you didn't have some kind of reasonable investments and savings, you're toast.
Yeah.
If you've let yourself go physically and you're just not in very good health and you're way overweight and all that kind of thing, your years after retirement, which should be, unlike me running around talking to people all the time, it should be out doing all the things you want to do. I'm actually doing just exactly what I want to do and mountain biking. But so take care of yourself physically and fiscally. And when you retire, to the extent it's at all possible, is owe nobody anything.
Mm.
Then you don't need a lot of money to do whatever you want to do and be happy.
Fascinating. I love that advice. The physical and the fiscal, having no debts, obligations. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Walt Dabney today for being our guest here on the Caring Economy. He is, as you have seen, a legendary figure in America's park management and conservation community. Walt, I'm going to follow up with you. I have lots of ideas of ways that I could help and others could. And first and foremost, just let me say thank you for your service and for your advocacy and for joining us today.
Enjoyed it, Toby. Good to meet you too.